The only problem was it was theft, and theft is ultimately is not a sustainable business model.
If coyotes hear death noises, the males produce more sperm, the females produce more eggs and have larger litters. They have a built-in population control valve.
Depopulation, deglobalization, deindustrialization, and then decentralization, not the big cities, we're moving out, and then de-urbanization.
All right, welcome to another episode of Capability Amplifier. This episode is super exciting. If you're familiar with Peter Diamandis' 6 Ds of exponential organizations, Dan came up with 6 other Ds. So just a quick review. Peter's are digitized, deceptive, disruptive, demonetized, dematerialized, and democratized. So Dan, first a little comment on the 6 Ds, and then let's go through your 6 Ds.
Yeah, well, just a little backup here, and I really have gotten great value out of Peter's 6 Ds.
And, me too.
I've had a coach as a company, and Peter, his company. We've had a collaboration going back 10 years in the area of Peter's, really mastery of things high tech. And he came up with a framework when we first did the Abundance 360, which is our collaboration. And he said, this is how the world's going to develop over, the next 30 or 40 years. And it was terrifically provocative. I mean, it's pretty, and he daily makes his business to understand what the combination of the microchip and computers and mobile phones and the internet are, how they're reorganizing the world. And he just said that, first of all, everything in the world will be digitized, every activity, and I believe in that. And that the changes that makes are deceptive for a long time. They're sort of under the water. And then at a certain point, they come out in a big launch out of the water. And that becomes instantly disruptive to some existing digitalized industry. And we've seen that over and over. If you just look at the recording industry, what's happened to music, and Steve Jobs and others, he wasn't the first, but MP3 players was a big thing on the internet, and Napster was the real launch here. And you could just pull down, from the internet, your song that you wanted to sing. The only problem was it was theft, and theft is ultimately is not a sustainable business model. And so Steve Jobs, he took an MP3, made it beautiful as Apple does, and made it better, and then he said, you have the internet. But he said the big thing is the problem with the music industry. If you like a song, you have to buy 11 others, because the record stores, whether you're buying a long playing LP, or you're buying a disc in the old day, or you're buying, now you're downloading, they require that you buy all 12 songs, and they don't give very much money to the artist. And if you're an artist and you just have one song, you're out of luck. And he says it's kind of an unfair world. And he put all of them together with the iPod, the new Apple, which ran off the Apple platform for all their computers, and the internet, which was available. And he says, why don't we just put all songs on the internet, and you buy them for 99 cents. And instead of the artist getting 10 cents on the dollar, we'll give them 60 cents. And, immediately all the artists in the world went to iTunes. And in 2 or 3 years, Apple Computer was the largest distributor of music. Now you have other Spotify, you have Pandora and everything, and that they're not number one anymore. But, it certainly was disruptive. And it demonetized, extraordinarily demonetized, all the lawyers and accountants who were running the recording companies immediately got demonetized, and the record companies got demonetized. And then there was the dematerialization. First of all, you had to have stuff in the old days. You had to have a record, you had to have discs. Now it's just an electronic signal on now it's your iPhone. And it democratizes the whole world. The music world immediately got democratized. And anybody who's got some talent and who's got a decent studio can knock out a song, and you might get 1 million listeners if it goes. So I totally believe in this. I mean, I totally believe this is happening. But Peter's whole contention, the whole world will be included in this, and my study of it. And I'm a sort of a historian, and I'm very, very interested in the history of technology, actually, my college, I never realized it, but I looked it up. So my college majors, I have 2 majors in my bachelor's degree, and one of them is the history of philosophy and the history of science. So I have the history of science. I have 2. So I have first of all, I just have a natural interest in this, and then I've done some academic work on it. And what's happened that is taking everybody by surprise is that the big worry about the planet, there'll be too many people on the planet. The big problem right now is that populations are dropping very, very quickly. And there's a guy named Peter Zeihan, and this is Zeihan, and he's a wonderful writer, and he's a wonderful speaker, and that's oftentimes don't really see that. And he's created 4 books over the last 8 years that are just mind blower, and they get better and better because he predicts things, and the things that he predicted happen. So, for example, in 2014. He was talking about Russia, and he says, I figure somewhere between around early 2022, this is in 2014, that Russia is going to invade Ukraine. Yep. I mean, you got to know something to feel good about making a prediction like that, and he did it. So anyway, so what I've done is because I do a podcast with Peter Diamandis, and I'm saying I got 6 Ds to match your D. So this is my list. So I put the matrix. I love matrices. So you have the 6 Ds, Peter's technological digital ones down one side, and you have these other 6 Ds across the top. And so this is the first time.
Okay,
Mike, first time. This is this is the first time I've ever run through this. Okay.
I'm super excited for it.
Yeah, so I'm just going to name my 6 Ds to go.
Let's go through them and tear them apart. So
the first one is depopulation, and this is pretty much worldwide. It's pretty much worldwide with some exceptions, and we'll talk about the exceptions. The other one is deglobalization, because population's going down, so other countries are not going to have workers, and they're not going to have consumers. Okay, and virtually all the countries in the world are aging very quickly, and they're not creating new humans. And what they're especially lacking is people between ages 20 and 50. And your economy is really based on that 30-year stretch of people from 20 years old to 50 years old. They're the producers, they're the workers, they're also the buyers, they're big spending, they're the big spenders. And near the end, 40 to 50, they become really big investors.
Yep.
So if you're running out of those, 2 things are happening. You're not replacing them with, if you're depopulating, you're not replacing them. And the big problem about 20-year-olds, if you're lacking them, it takes 20 years to get new ones.
Yeah.
And they're expensive. I mean, producing new 20-year-olds, I grew up on a farm, you grew up in farm country, very, very cheap in the old days, children could actually be an asset in the old days. You remember being an asset,
Yeah.
Mike?
Well,
Yeah.
that's
Now
exactly.
people live in apartments and condos in cities, and children.
Mhm.
First, you don't have children, and the other ones, they're just nothing but expense. Yeah. So anyway, there's some startling figures on the depopulation, but then you deglobalize, so you don't have the kind of trade. And the U.S. has basically created security for all global trade since 1945, since the end of
Yep.
the Second World War. And there's now you're going to have to rent a carrier group. I mean, if you want a carrier group, a U.S. carrier group to patrol your waters and prevent piracy and breakout of, warfare and everything else, the U.S. saying, nah, I don't know, that doesn't look like our unique ability. And I don't think we
Mhm.
really want to do that. Well, we'll pay you half our GDP to do it. Okay, we'll try it out for 3 months, but I don't think we're going to like this. The other thing is deindustrialization. If there isn't global trade, then you're not going to be creating things in most countries that other people. If you don't have the people to produce them, and you don't have guaranteed free trade of the oceans, you're not going to want them. And that means that you're going to have a decentralization. People aren't going to pack into big cities, especially big port cities. They're not going to pack into it, and they're going to go back to the countryside. And you see that even in COVID, how many people whose business is actually digital, in the sense that you and I, we can operate from everywhere because we mastered Zoom, and the
Mhm.
things that we do actually, fit in nicely with virtual communication. So, I mean, you have a place in Mexico that and you're developing it into a real neat compound, and there's going to be other people that you like who are living nearby and
Yep.
everything else. Well, you and I could be doing, I mean, all you have to do is move the sign behind you to Mexico, and nobody knows, we're in
Yeah.
Mexico. I can do it from my cottage. I could be in Arizona right now on free days, and I could be doing my work. I can do my workshops by Zoom. I can do everything else. But for other people, they're going to find out that cities just keep getting more expensive. First of all, because they're losing taxpayers, which means they're going to have higher taxes, and they want to have children, so they go 100 miles out. You can get 20 acres. You can have 3 cars. The school systems are good. The local hospitals are good, and everything else. So what you're going to see now is, instead of moving to the country, at least they're going to move to the suburbs. They're not going to be
Mhm.
they're not going to be downtown. They want they want a place that detached, and they want half an acre of land, and they want to be part of a community where they know the neighbors. The next one is very interesting. It's the deurbanization, but the last one is decredentialization. And then what it has to do with, especially as higher education. So right now in the United States and Canada, you're 18 years old. It doesn't matter whether you graduated from high school or not, but you take a 6-week welding course.
Mhm. Yep.
And within the first year, after getting the certificate that you've passed the welding course, you'll be making $60,000 a year.
Mhm.
You go to a 4-year college right now, and then put 3 years into the workplace, you might be making $60,000 after 7 years. And for your entire life, the welder is going to make more than you do.
Yes.
Yeah. So those are the 6: population, deglobalization, deindustrialization, decentralization, deurbanization, and decredentialism. So that's what I'm putting together, and I'm picking this up from. But Peter, so I got 2 Peters here. I got Peter Diamandis, and I got Peter Zion, and I'm taking Peter's 6. And I'm taking Peter Zion's 6, and I'm putting them together in a matrix. The
Mm.
reason I'm doing that is there's nothing but great opportunity for entrepreneurs when you put these 160 together with another 60.
Well, this is I can't wait to rip this apart with you. I took a bunch of notes while you were going through those. I don't know if you and I have talked about a NYU professor. His name is Scott Galloway. He's a guy I've followed for a long time. Do you know his name or and why? So he has a new book that's coming out. It'll be out by the time this episode hits. It's called Adrift: America in 100 Charts. It just so happens I'm working with someone right now um, who has a business vision for bringing apprenticeships back to the United States, which happen to be very, very low compared to like Denmark. Denmark, it's I believe it was 48 out of 1,000 jobs. In the US, it's around 3. Or maybe it's between 1 and 3. It's very, very low. And you and I have talked about this to some degree. I'm a huge fan of, for some people who aren't cut out for college, present company incled.
Yeah, well, if I hadn't gone to the particular college I went to, I wouldn't have a college degree. But, I'm into ideas, and I went to a college that just does the great books of the Western world. And, I like to know where ideas come from. And this is a great college for doing that. But if I hadn't had that college, if it was a textbook college, I would never have gotten a college degree.
Yep. Yes. And I think the biggest thing about Scott, the reason I wanted to bring him up is even though he's worked for NYU, he just said what America's colleges are doing is inhumane and immoral between their prices and they've got huge Harvard, for example, is billions of dollars. And he says,
it is over 50 billion. It is over 50 billion. Their endowment is over 50 billion.
Yeah. And he's like, they've turned into gigantic country club babysitting.
Daycare center. They're daycare centers for 18 to 30-year-olds, because some people, don't leave school.
Yeah. And a huge percentage are burdened with debt when they leave. They can never pay it back. And a lot of this is for blah, blah, blah. We've heard the political discourse as well.
And half the debt is actually for graduate school. It's not for undergrad.
Exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. So I bring that up because one of the things that Scott did is he's created his own alternative school. Google has one. Amazon has one. And their promise is, look, in 6 to 18 months, we're going to teach you stuff that will get you a very high paying job, give you the equivalent of our degree, except you're going to be a specialist and be able to take advantage of our platform. And they're giving this education away.
Yeah.
And so,
which I think is wrong. So people should pay something for it. I'm totally against free education.
Yeah, I happen to agree. Joe likes to say, if you don't pay attention. And I think all parties must have skin in the game to value the relationship and all the people. So anyway, Scott's one of these guys who is a very clear thinker and sees the future, I believe, very clearly. And one of his other books was called The Four, and he did the hidden DNA of Apple or Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. And then he also did a really good job with something he calls the algebra of happiness. After just studying lots of people enter into the market, and you guys think similarly. He's I really enjoy his podcasts and content. But
it's a great discovery for me. I'll look him right up.
Yeah, I'll get you something. He does a really good job of creating short videos as well, communicating big ideas in 1 to 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But back to your list, the depopulation.
Well, I'll give you an example.
Go for it.
I'll give you the big one because China, people say China is just going to take over the world. The Chinese themselves, and this is Peter Zion looking deep, the Chinese themselves, this is not estimates from the outside, this is the Chinese themselves, believe that in 50 years, by 2070, they will have declined in population. Right now, it's about 1.3 million. I'm always suspicious of figures coming out of China, but they themselves say that by 2070, they'll be down to 650 million. They will lose 650 million in population. Okay. And Peter Zion believes that this will actually happen by 2050. Okay, and the reason is, they had their one child policy, and guess what? If you can only have one child, if it looks like it's going to be a girl, you abort the girl.
Yep.
Unfortunately, girls are necessary for procreation. I don't know if anybody's noticed this, but
yeah.
girls. And the other thing is that the girls that do exist in the 20 to 50, which is the productive age, aren't even in the same part of the country where most of the men are. The women are the ones who are the tech workers. They are near the coast. They're near the coast, and and they're in the productive sector. And most of the men are out in the countryside. They're doing grunt work. They're doing dirt work. And a large number of them are unemployed.
Yep.
And the other one is that if you're the only child in the family, you haven't really learned teamwork. So they've got basically 40 years of people who aren't good at, don't play well with others. And they feel very entitled, and they're very expensive, and they're very choosy about what kind of work they do if they're wealthy.
Yep.
I mean, Toronto, I live in the city of Toronto. It just grows and grows and grows. And the dirty little secret is an enormous amount of it is Chinese kids being sent to Canada with tons of money to come over here. They're trying to get their children and their money out of the country as fast as they can, And, we have 5 Chinatowns, any big city like New York's Chinatown is this big. Toronto has 5 of them, and each are as big as New York's Chinatown or Los Angeles' Chinatown.
I wasn't aware of that. And the problem with giving kids free money is bad things ensue. What do they say? Soft men create hard times.
Yeah.
That cycle.
This is a good example. Yeah.
Yeah.
And hard men create good times.
Yeah, precisely. So I don't see happy and good coming out of that. Plus, hey, this is Mike Koenigs. Sorry to interrupt the podcast, but if you're an action taker and ready to transform and reinvent yourself and your business, go to connect2mike.com to learn more and book a conversation with me right now. All right, back to the episode. There's something interesting. I'm going to just throw something by you that's kind of weird, but I like throwing little weird ideas into the ethers, which is, have you ever heard before that when coyotes are being killed, if coyotes hear death noises, the males produce more sperm, the females produce more eggs and have larger litters. They have a built-in population control valve. Well, you know how culturally, men have low testosterone. Suddenly, there's let's just say this weird. I'm going to go on the limb here and say
they're not manly men. They're not.
It's not just exactly. Yeah, that and a whole lot more. Get all weird.
Yeah.
And the cultural acceptance. What if there's sort of like a cosmic radio beacon saying, "Hey, let's just do the switcheroo here. Nature is sending out a signal that affects the human population." Maybe we've got little alien transmitters built into us.
Well, I don't think it's so much that, but we are connected to an unusual degree because of the internet and phones and the social media and that. And my feeling is big messages that aren't obvious to anyone go out through the network. It's death signals are going out. Through the medium. So my feeling is that we're kind of self-regulating in a way that authorities don't even understand. But the big thing is, here's the skinny of it. 10 years from now, 2032, there will be only 5 developed countries in the world. Developed, all the European countries are developed countries. Several of the Southeast Asian countries are developed. can't, and Mexico would count as a developed country. Okay, I mean, Mexico is is a very productive, very, very prosperous country compared to the world standard, to the world. Sub-Sahara Africa, not so much. Lots of South America, not so much, and lots of Southeast Asia, not so much. And everything like that. But among the developed countries, so and I count the 50 American states as countries. I mean, compared to other countries. California, I mean, Texas has an economy that's 50% bigger than Canada. I mean, California is the equal of France, and they also have armies, they have National Guards and everything. So 50 states, but then you take anywhere in the world that would compare with one of the American states, you count that as developed, and I would say there's probably another 50 that have come that direction. And only 5 in the entire world will have not lost population in the world. So there's 200 countries in the UN, and only 5 of them, 10 years from now, will have not lost population. And it's the United States. And the United States is really clever. We have a faucet, and it's called immigration. Anytime we want more people, we just turn the faucet and we bring them in. And so the U.S. by 2050 will probably be about 400 million. Okay, that'll be growth. France is another one, and the France saw this as a problem 40 years ago, and they just reward the hell out of families that produce children. They've got a built-in rewards. Sweden does more or less the same thing. And then a country hardly anybody thinks about, Argentina, and Argentina is just in a great spot in the world. And the other one is New Zealand. New Zealand is the other one. Not Australia, but New Zealand. And everybody else will have lost population. Okay, so we're at about 8, as nearest figure. And everybody says, well, in 50 years, we're going to be at 10, 11, and everything else. We won't be at 8 10 years from now. It'll start going. And when population declines, it does it really fast because old people. First of all, morale is low in a country that's losing population. That's Russia. Russia, since the fall of the Soviet Union, there were 31 years since the fall of the Union, out of every 10 pregnancies in Russia over the last 31 years, 7 of them have been aborted. You know why?
I'd say there's no hope.
No future.
No future. Yeah.
Future. No future.
Yeah. Lack of a compelling future is what Tony Robbins says is the number one cause of suicide, right?
Oh yeah.
And depression and anxiety. So that's makes absolute sense.
So the depopulation, deglobalization, deindustrialization, and then decentralization, not the big cities, we're moving out, and then urbanization. 50% of the world's population really lives in cities of one kind. I mean, Mexico City, once they hit 30 million, nobody knows how many people they have, 30 million. Well, you can't feed that city. You can't hire, that many people. So they go back to the countryside. And then credentialization means, well, do you have a 4-year university degree? It's not about that anymore. It's about, can you do anything that we can hire? First of all, can you do something and fill a job? Because there's going to be more job openings than there are people to fill them. So, the world has a great preference for truck drivers and welders and electricians and carpenters and, everything. So if you can do something and provide it, and a 4-year degree in nothing useful is a very, very worthless, expensive acquisition.
Yes.
And I mean, I really am looking forward to reading and watching and perhaps meeting Scott Galloway, because I think
I have a couple angles on how to get to him, and I took a
Does
couple
that
of
include Joe
classes.
Polish? Because Joe Polish couldn't get to him in one day.
Yeah, one or the other. I was interestingly at Wizard Academy this past week with Roy H. Williams, and there was one of the guys who was there has done work with Scott's new school, and so we reconnected. And then I had one other interesting thing to add, another person to investigate who loves to go down the rabbit hole. It's another podcaster. He's a young guy who works for MIT in the artificial intelligence lab. His name is Lex Friedman, Fridman. He's originally Russian. His family immigrated here to the US, and he interviewed Ray Kurzweil. And they shared some great stats, but the conversation revolved around singularity, superintelligence, how that's really going to affect us. And Lex likes to ask all kinds of questions about anything from aliens to AI. What is God? What is the meaning of life in the mixture of all this? Because Ray comes from a fantastic point of view on many of these things. But what Ray had a really, really compelling bit of information. He said, do you know, when you survey the general population, you ask them, is the world better now or worse than it's ever been? And the overriding response, 70% say, well, it's definitely worse. And Ray says, no, in fact, in every way, life is basically twice as good now as it was. I don't remember if it was 25 or 50 years ago. And only 1% say that. So, there's the difference between the narrative and the reality, statistically speaking.
What I would say is Ray has a very convincing argument, but he doesn't have a compelling offer.
Yeah. Well, I don't disagree. I think he gets his, I say this often about anyone who's kind of academic minded, is they spend a lot of time staring at their belly button and don't create great offers.
Yeah.
And
6 weeks of becoming a welder, 60,000 at the end of the first year is not a convincing argument. It's a compelling offer.
Yes. and he does talk specifically about that, the acceleration, but I think
it's a religion. I mean, singularity is a religion.
That's interesting.
I mean, you and I mean, if anything that our childhood equipped us to is to identify a religion when we come into contact with one. And it's a religion. And it's a religion for techies. It's techies for the most part don't have religion. So, but there's a desire inside of human beings to have a transcendent purpose for things. And their transcendent purpose is that technology is, the superintelligence is like God, it's the Messiah, so.
Well, I want to give you one of the key points that was compelling, though, that he walked away with. He said, in all of this, the one thing that technology does is it always creates more jobs. The more technology you have, the more jobs that are created versus taken away. And he didn't cite the source of that data, but he just gave a lot of examples.
Well, I've got the source. It's Julian is a man named, a statistician actually, by the name of Julian Simon in the 1960s and 70s. And he says two things happen with greater population. He said, first of all, the quality of life always goes up. And the reason is you got more human beings who can specialize, and there's jobs for their specialization. Lower population does just the opposite.
That makes total sense. That is
quality of life goes down, and there isn't the money and the time for people to specialize. They got to worry about food.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if you're focused on your Maslow's hierarchy, things degrade. I think that's
you're coming down from whatever you want to call the top one, from self-actualization or I call it self-transformation. You don't have time for self-transformation. You don't even have time for achievement. you just want to belong, hopefully, to a group that's got food and energy.
Yes. So here's a question that I ponder frequently, though. When I look at all 6 of these, this will be our last question for this episode.
Yeah.
But my observation right now is the effect of inflation, which on one hand, the good thing about inflation is it decreases the value of money and increases prices, and it keeps an economy moving. In other words, you gotta do something with it, or it devalues. But ultimately, it's theft and stealing by the government. And when I look at population, globalization, industrializations, decentralization, urbanization, decredentialization, it's
everything
like
everything gets more expensive,
and that hurts the less educated, those who don't move faster, and I don't know if this is true for sure or not, but if you look at it encourages automation, but things like factory farming, which if not done properly, is damaging to the quality of food, to the earth they're doing this on. I mean, the use of chemicals, et cetera. And there's pretty compelling arguments about all smaller farms that are integrated and rotate and aren't dependent on all these new methods, produce better quality food and don't damage the soil, et cetera. So I guess what's your...
Well, can I say something? All that is happening in one place in the world, in the United States. But it's not happening elsewhere in the world because there isn't the time and the money for people to actually bring those technologies in.
Okay.
United States, I agree. I mean, everything that Ray Kurzweil says is true, but it's only true for the United States, and it's true for Canada and Mexico because they're part of the same economy. I mean, it's an integrated economy. The 3 countries are totally integrated, and people who are allied very closely with the United States will get part of that, but not to the full degree that the U.S. The biggest problem is the U.S. is going to go into warp speed. Okay, because Americans can shift really quickly.
Yes.
I mean, you could have half the universities and colleges in the United States go broke over the next 5 years and just disappear. Here's a statistic. Last year, 2021, September, certain number of millions of students. This year, 1 year later, 4 million fewer college students started in September. And people say, oh, it's the money. It's not the money, it's the purpose. There's no purpose for them to go to university. They know there's no purpose. They know that truck drivers save their bacon. They know that people deliver things to their homes save their bacon. It wasn't a PhD. Well, it might have been a PhD with a delivery job, but his PhD didn't make him a better driver. Yeah. So I believe that everything on the Peter 6D side is true, but it's only true for the United States and countries connected with the United States. So that's my thing. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. It is going to happen, but it's not going to happen around the world.
Okay. Yeah, that does
that drives people crazy.
Yeah.
There's half the American population that drives them crazy, because their children's jobs are in that globalized world where everything is growing and everything else. All their children, all their degrees in that's the United Nations. It's there's all these global movements and everything. None of them will exist. The environmental movement won't exist after 3 freezing European summers, 3 freezing. The next 3 winters for the European Union it's going to be freezing. They're not going to have enough energy, and all of a sudden, boy, we really like coal, we really like oil, we really like gas, and we can't wait that nuclear gets here as fast as it can.
Yeah. No, I think the
so I mean that's
right.
my take, and a latte that's now $1 more than it was 6 months ago. Well, yeah, that's what it's worth right there. But I'm just putting a whole bunch of stuff together that I'm, interested in kind of a new way is that Peter's 6Ds are true for the United States and countries kind of like the United States. And the 6Ds are for the rest of the world. The other 6Ds are for the rest of the world.
Okay. I love the bridge. I think the thinking behind it is, I'll ask you, well, if it's okay, I'll ask you one last question, which is what made you see the relationship and connection? What was that aha moment?
Well, first of all, I've got a lifetime great interest in history and how history and in history, the one thing, nothing lasts forever. Nothing lasts forever, and something new is always starting. So that's just a theory, and a lot of people have a tendency that something's growing, they see it as straight line forever. It's straight line forever. And I said, no, there's nothing in history that supports something good constantly growing forever. And the other thing is that the most adaptable come out on top. The most adaptable. That's true in the animal kingdom. It's true in human societies. And I would say the other thing is that the people haven't understood that the world of the last 75 years, it was about 5 generations of people, was solely because the United States decided to create a very secure global economy, basically to stop the Soviet Union, and the worst thing that ever happened to all these countries is that the Soviet Union collapsed, because that was the only reason why America would provide this worldwide protection and you could make anything. And that happened 31 years ago, and the U.S. started changing 31 years ago, but the rest of the world didn't. And so the U.S. is actually prepared for this, not like there's a brain trust somewhere in the United States that knows it, but Americans are really a pretty adaptable people. We're pretty adaptable. Just look at our two histories and where we were headed in our childhood and where we've ended up. And, we got here by being very, very adaptable to changing circumstances.
Yes. That's true.
And that's a capability amplifier.
And yes. And to us as entrepreneurs, it's when we see pain, we innovate, we create a solution that generates revenue and that multiplies itself. So that's what's, obviously especially exciting to me. And I look at it, I'm like, you never met a problem I didn't like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's other people's bad news is your good news.
It's true. Capitalism at work. Well, this has been a super, super interesting episode, and I've got it inspired me because I've got an idea for a subsequent one that's very, very connected to it, but it stems from a totally different point of view. So why don't we wrap this one up, and I'll see you in the next one, Dan.
Thank you very much, Mike.
All right. So if you're watching or listening, we always appreciate any shares you have. If you can think of someone who would enjoy this episode, definitely share it. Also, in the show notes will be a link to transcripts, links to books that we discussed, and personalities as well, and some other materials too. So with all that, leave a comment or like and subscribe and all that other stuff. But this is Capability Amplifier. I'm Mike Koenigs. I'm here with my good friend Dan Sullivan. I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you, Mike.
You got it.